I was in my final semester of college, barely keeping my head above water between thesis deadlines, late-night study sessions, and the slow grind of burnout. When I found a cheap flat in a crowded old building near campus, I jumped at the chance, even if it looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 80s. The walls were paper thin, the lights in the hallway flickered like they were scared of the dark, and the ceiling felt just low enough to press on my nerves. I figured I could put up with it for a few more months. But what bothered me most wasn't the condition of the building. It was the man across the hall. He was strange. I never heard him speak, never heard him come or go, but sometimes I'd catch a shadow under his door or feel the weight of unseen eyes when I stepped outside mine. There was something about him, too still, too quiet, like he was always there, just on the other side, listening. At first, I brushed it off as paranoia. I told myself I was just tired, maybe imagining things after too many sleepless nights and too much coffee. But then I started noticing him more often, brief, unsettling moments where our paths crossed in the hallway. He never said a word. He would glance at me, then quickly look away, as if even eye contact was something to be avoided. Sometimes he'd freeze mid-step when he noticed me coming, like he didn't want to be seen at all. His movements were cautious, deliberate, like he was always calculating how not to draw attention. It wasn't just awkwardness, it felt like he was hiding something. The more I saw him, the more I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was the way he always wore the same dark hoodie pulled low over his face, or how he never carried a bag, keys, or anything at all, just his hands shoved deep in his pockets. I started noticing how he only left his flat late at night, slipping out when the hallways were quiet, when most people were asleep. A few times, I caught him glancing over his shoulder as he walked, scanning the shadows like he expected someone to follow. I kept telling myself it wasn't my business, that I was just stressed, but deep down, I knew I was watching him because he already seemed to be watching me. Eventually, the tension in the hallway became unbearable. I couldn't keep pretending I didn't see him, couldn't ignore the strange silence that hung between our doors. One evening, after a particularly long day on campus, I found myself face to face with him as I reached my door. He hesitated, keys halfway to the lock, his posture rigid. I forced a small, polite smile and said, "Hi," just one word, just enough to break the silence. He didn't respond. His eyes flicked to mine, then away, and without a word he slipped into his flat and shut the door behind him with a soft but decisive click. I stood there for a long moment, the echo of his silence louder than anything he could have said. Something about that moment felt wrong, like I had crossed a line I hadn't known was there. After that, things changed, subtly at first. I started catching glimpses of him through the peephole, standing in front of my door a second too long before disappearing down the hall. I'd returned from class to find the hallway empty, but the faint scent of cigarette smoke lingered in the air, even though no one in the building smoked. Once I found a small scrape on my door handle, like someone had tried to open it. I told myself it was just wear and tear, but my gut said otherwise. I started locking my door the second I got inside. Something had shifted in him since I spoke that single word, like it made me real in his eyes. Like now, I mattered. As the days passed, his presence became harder to ignore. I'd see him at odd hours, leaning against the stairwell railings, lingering at the mailboxes without checking anything, always watching with that blank, unreadable expression. I began to change my routine, leaving earlier, coming home later, avoiding the hallway when I could, but it never seemed to matter. Somehow, he was always there. And then came the nights where I felt something deeper than fear, a weight in my chest, a creeping instinct that told me not to go home, not yet. The streets around the flat seemed quieter than usual, the alleys darker, more twisted. It was like the building itself was warning me, urging me to stay away. One night, after staying late on campus to finish a draft of my thesis, I found myself hesitating at the edge of the street that led to my building. The road was unusually still, the kind of quiet that didn't feel peaceful, just wrong. The lights above flickered weakly, casting long, crooked shadows down the narrow alleys that branched off like skeletal fingers. My steps slowed as I approached the final stretch, a gnawing sensation crawling up my spine. Then I saw him. At the far end of the corridor, half hidden in the shadow of a flickering street lamp, he stood motionless. His face was barely visible, but I didn't need light to recognize him. He was waiting. My heart pounded as I backed away, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up like a warning. I didn't know what had changed, why that night felt different, but I knew I couldn't stay there. My feet moved on their own, and I turned to walk quickly, trying to stay calm, hoping he hadn't seen my panic. But then I heard it, footsteps behind me, slow but deliberate. He was following me. I broke into a run, my breath quick and shallow as I turned the corner into a narrow alley between the flats. The shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long, swallowing me whole. Every footstep echoed in the silence, and I could feel him closing in, the chill of his presence crawling over my skin. I rounded another corner, my pulse thundering in my ears, but the alley stretched on forever, closing in on me. I could hear him now, footsteps growing faster, matching my pace, like he was just behind me. The walls felt like they were closing in, the alleys winding tighter and tighter, as if the building itself were part of the hunt. I could barely breathe, the air thick with panic. I dared a quick glance behind me. He was closer now, his face barely visible in the dim light, his posture stiff and predatory. I stumbled, my foot catching on the uneven pavement, but I forced myself to keep going, the fear driving me forward. I had to find someone, anyone. Just as I thought my legs would give out, I turned a corner and saw a police car parked by the curb, its lights flashing softly in the dark. I couldn't believe my luck. Without thinking, I ran toward the car, my breath ragged and uneven. I slammed my hand against the side window, shouting, "Please! He's chasing me! He's going to hurt me!" The officer inside looked up in shock, quickly opening the door and stepping out to assess me. I could see the confusion in his eyes. He didn't know who I was, but he could see the terror written all over my face. "Who's chasing you?" he asked, his voice steady but firm. I pointed back toward the alley, my hand trembling as I gasped for air. "Him, he's the one. He's been following me for days." The officer's expression hardened as he stepped forward, pulling out his radio. "Stay here," he ordered, his voice all business now. He quickly called for backup, his eyes flicking to the alley behind me. The terror in my chest twisted into something else, relief maybe, but it was quickly replaced by the cold realization that something terrible was about to unfold. The officer moved quickly, his movements purposeful as he headed toward the alley, his hand resting on his holstered gun. I stood frozen, watching in a mix of fear and relief, my legs weak beneath me. The silence stretched as the minutes crawled by, each second feeling like an eternity. Then I heard the faint sound of voices, followed by the unmistakable shuffle of feet on the pavement. Another officer appeared from the alley, his hand gripping the arm of the man who had been following me. He was handcuffed, his face twisted in a strange mix of rage and confusion, his eyes darting around like a cornered animal. The officer guiding him toward the car was speaking to him in low tones, but I couldn't make out the words. All I could do was stare, my mind still trying to piece together the horror of what had just happened. How had he gone from an odd neighbor to a threat? What had he been hiding all this time? The next day, the police returned to search the man's apartment. It was like something out of a nightmare. They found photographs of women, some from the building, others from nearby areas, hidden in a drawer, and files filled with unsettling details. As the officers arrested him, the full scope of his crimes became horrifyingly clear. He was involved in human trafficking, using his quiet, unassuming presence to lure victims into his web. I didn't sleep much that night. The fear still lingered, deep in my bones, but there was also a strange sense of closure, knowing that the danger had been stopped. I hadn't realized how close I had come to becoming one of his victims until it was all over. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something far darker than I could have ever imagined, something that had been hiding right across the hall.